BRICS are striking back. They want to use real goods to fight America's pile of paper promises. The first blow is asset exchanges like gold, rare earths, and energy operating without using the USD. And the next step could very well be a new payment method. Independent and de-dollarized. It can be said that the global geo-economic order, built on the USD, is under immense pressure as U.S. total public debt has surpassed $36 trillion and is forecast to reach $37 trillion. By year-end, the brutal heat of this debt bomb has made Eastern powers unable to sit still. The flag of uprising has been raised, and an earth-shaking battle will sooner or later have to erupt. Welcome to Inner Shadow, where there will be truths that society doesn't want you to know. In the last century, power rested in the hands of those who owned nuclear bombs. But in the 21st century, the strongest weapon is no longer a warhead, it is gold, rare earths, and energy. The elements that feed industry, run technology, and sustain the economic order. Whoever controls them doesn't need to fire a shot and can still make the whole world bow. BRICS counteroffensive is not merely a financial test. It is a civilizational uprising in which nations once dismissed as peripheral are standing up. It is the right to price real value, not by a bank's promises, but by human sweat and real resources. For the first time in nearly a century, the global monetary order is no longer a Western monopoly, and the balance of power is tilting toward the East, where gold bars, barrels of oil, grains of rice, and ore deposits have become the ballots that decide the future. The weakening of the USD does not mean economic apocalypse. The world will not collapse. It will simply change kings. The paper money empire is moving toward its finale, making room for a new era in which value no longer comes from the ability to print money, but from the ability to create and protect resources. And when paper trust dissolves, people are forced to return to real value. Gold, land, data, and energy foundations that cannot be printed, cannot be forged, and cannot be punished by a single account lock. The origin of the dollar empire, 100 years of ruling the world with paper money. If the 19th century was the age of gunpowder and warships, the 20th century witnessed a subtler weapon. Pieces of paper printed with American presidents. After World War II, with Europe in ruins, the United States became the only power still standing, holding 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. From the gold vaults at Fort Knox, Washington stepped onto the negotiating table at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 and laid the foundation for a new financial order. Every other currency would be tightly pegged to the value of the U.S. dollar, and the USD would be pegged to gold. That alone was enough to turn America into the world's central bank, the place that would decide the value of everything from a grain of rice to a barrel of oil. But less than 30 years later, the U.S. played dirty. It abandoned the very rules it had set. In 1971, President Richard Nixon announced the end of the gold standard, meaning the U.S. dollar would no longer be backed by real gold. From that point on, the Federal Reserve's money printing machine was pushed to maximum capacity. America could print hundreds of billions of dollars without having to mine a single additional ounce of gold, and it did exactly that. To fund wars in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Korea, the Middle East. Every bomb that fell meant millions of new dollars pumped out of thin air. But printing money was only the first step. The US also created an entire system to cage the world with dollars. First came the petrodollar, an implicit deal with Saudi Arabia and OPEC that all oil would be priced and traded in US dollars. If a country wanted to buy energy, it had to hold dollars. As a result, global money and assets poured into the U.S., like a flood exchanged for paper that America could print almost for free. Next came SWIFT and the IMF, two arms that control international transactions. Any money flow crossing borders must pass through these systems. And of course, Washington holds the key. This form of rule is so sophisticated, it doesn't require a single bullet. America prints money and funds wars, then rebuilds in dollars, then profits from interest rates and bonds. A perfect loop. Blood is spilled elsewhere, and the money flows back into its own pocket. Nearly 100 countries depend on the USD for trade, reserves, and debt. And the world, as a result, has become America's indirect debtor, a soft financial empire where power does not sit in tanks or aircraft carriers, but in numbers dancing across Wall Street screens. But every form of power has limits. Today, at this very moment, the U.S. is carrying public debt of more than $36 trillion, exceeding 1.2 times U.S. GDP. A currency once seen as the symbol of trust is now steadily losing real value. As the Fed keeps printing more money to service debt, inflation spreads globally, forcing other nations to pay the price with their own sweat and resources. Each time America pumps money into bailouts, food and energy prices in poorer countries rise. The dollar is thus both savior and shackle, the thing that has bound the world for nearly a century. Now, as U.S. debt swells like a balloon and confidence begins to crack, people realize the most powerful empire on the planet was built not on gold, but on trust, something that can vanish like smoke. And when trust wavers, those paper castles can collapse in a single gust of wind called de-dollarization. A wave of resistance BRICS rises against the dollar empire. For nearly a century, the whole world has had to breathe in rhythm with the U.S. dollar. But now, a silent wave of resistance has risen from the East and the global South, where countries once dominated are gradually trying to rewrite the rules. That wave is called BRICS, a name that began as an economic concept but has now become a global financial counteroffensive alliance. When it was founded in 2009, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa only wanted to create a small counterweight to the G7. But after more than a decade, the picture has changed. In 2025, the bloc officially expanded to include Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the UAE, names carrying oil, gold, and geopolitical religious influence. If the G7 represents an old world order, wealthy, industrialized, weighed down by debt, then BRICS is becoming the symbol of a newer world, younger, richer in resources, and more ambitious. And their goal is no longer just balancing power, but flipping the monetary chessboard, de-dollarizing the world. The first counterstrike came in early September 2025, when BRICS announced the creation of an exchange for gold, rare earths, and strategic metals. Operating independently of power centers like London, Manhattan, Shanghai, or Chicago. The defining feature: they do not use the U.S. dollar for settlement. All transactions are converted directly into local currencies or real goods such as gold, oil, gas, agricultural products, or precious metals. It was a punch straight into the heart of the Western financial system, where global commodity value has long been decided by faith in the dollar. With this exchange, BRICS is not only creating a marketplace for commodities, it is creating a new symbol of power. Whoever holds resources can price the world, and they have reasons to be confident. China controls up to 75% of global rare earth processing capacity, materials essential to technology and defense. Russia holds vast oil and gas supplies and a massive gold stockpile that once made Europe tremble through winter. Brazil controls 90% of niobium reserves, a core metal in the production of hypersonic weapons. And taken together, BRICS controls up to 40% of oil, 70% of cobalt, 50% of nickel, 1/3 of grains, and more than 12,500 tons of global gold reserves. If the West has paper, BRICS has real goods, resources, energy, and food. In other words, the West holds the key to the bank, while the East holds the key to the treasure vault. In a century where everything from computer chips to missiles requires rare earths, nickel, and cobalt, BRICS's control of supply chains is nothing less than holding the industrial world by the throat. However, BRICS does not choose a loud monetary coup. It chooses a strategy of quiet infiltration. It has not issued a common currency, which could panic the world. Instead, it erodes the dollar's power, bit by changing settlement habits. In 2025, 68% of intra-BRICS transactions abandoned the USD. It may sound small, but it is a historic turning point. Russia and China, the two pillar members, used local currencies for 90% of bilateral trade. Saudi Arabia, the emblem of the petrodollar for the past 50 years, also accepted the renminbi for 12% of its oil exports. Even India, always cautious, began paying for Russian oil in CNY instead of USD. Those moves are quiet, but the impact is violent. Every oil contract in CNY, every gold trade in rupees or rubles, is a cut carved out of the dollar fortress. No one declares war openly. No one severs relations, yet the monetary order is being eroded from within. What BRICS is doing is like a crack spreading across a wall. At first it is small, but when confidence in the US dollar falls, the entire wall can collapse at any moment. And the key point is, BRICS understands its own limits. It does not want to repeat America's mistake, building a new monetary empire only to be hated for it. It chooses to open new options rather than erase the old entirely. A world where no one is forced to trade in someone else's currency. That is the smartest way to weaken a dynasty, not by striking head-on, but by letting the throne rot on its own. This historic resistance is not fought on battlefields, but on asset exchanges, inside gold reserves, and across central bank screens. No gunfire, yet its destructive power is no less than a financial atomic bomb. BRICS is turning de-dollarization into a silent revolution, where each local currency transaction is a bullet fired into the heart of the dollar empire. And as this conflict spreads, the world will face the biggest question of the 21st century. Who truly has the right to set the price of the future, the money printer or the resource holder? The new strategic weapons, gold and data, replace paper money and trust. If the 20th century was a war of papers printed without limit, the 21st century is witnessing a spectacular return of gold metal, once dismissed as outdated in the digital finance era. Gold yields no interest, cannot be printed, cannot be manipulated by speeches or resolutions, yet it carries an invisible power: absolute trust. And as confidence in the US dollar begins to wobble, the world once again turns to the metallic light that once shaped human civilization. For 10 consecutive months, China quietly accumulated gold, pushing the precious metal's price to the highest level in history. Each ton imported is not merely a reserve, it is a brick building a new wall for the post-dollar financial system. Experts call this the natural reaction of economies losing trust in unbacked US debt. The story is simple. When real yields are negative, meaning deposits no longer generate returns after inflation, gold becomes the bond that cannot be printed more. It doesn't provide periodic income, but it preserves value when everything else collapses. The irony is that after World War II, US treasuries once played that role, the symbol of absolute safety, the foundation of global trust. Now gold has reclaimed that position, but this time, it is not sitting in Washington's vaults. It is in the reserves of Beijing, Moscow, and Riyadh. As the dollar loses attractiveness, gold becomes the new confidence benchmark, a kind of psychological gold standard for nations seeking to escape the dominance of paper money. China, leading this wave, is not hiding its ambition. It is not trying to peg the renminbi to gold in the old-fashioned way. It is using gold to build soft trust infrastructure, a far smarter strategy. In that system, gold plays a role similar to treasuries after 1945, something the world trusts and relies on to assess the financial health of a currency. The only difference is that gold is finite, while US debt is infinite. One side is extracted through real sweat and real resources. The other needs only a button press at the Federal Reserve. And that is why, if America once used faith in paper debt to rule the world, BRICS is using faith in real goods to strike back. A new financial system is forming around gold, rare earths, oil, and grains, things that cannot be printed, cannot be invented. This is a revolution of real value, and gold is only the opening shot. At the same time, BRICS is not stopping at hoarding resources. It is building a parallel payments infrastructure, financial arteries detached from SWIFT, which the U.S. controls. Russia has SPFS, China has SIPS, and the bloc is merging them into BRICS Pay, a cross-border payments network that needs no dollar and no Western intermediary. Transactions are encrypted with blockchain and integrated with CBDCs, national digital currencies, to ensure speed, security, and transparency. Behind this system lies a digitized map of power. Gold reserves distributed across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Data centers storing trade flows, settlement corridors in local currencies expanding by the day. Each advance in financial technology adds another link to this network, a world no longer dependent on SWIFT or Wall Street. In other words, BRICS' weapons in the 21st century are no longer missiles, but gold and data. One backing value, the other backing trust. Combined, they form a new financial empire built not on debt, but on real assets and real technology. And in an era where information moves faster than money, whoever controls data flows controls the value of currency itself. That is why, as gold hits new highs and BRICS' new payment systems go live, it is not merely financial volatility, it is a signal that the world order is changing owners. What is happening today, each gold bar, each line on the blockchain, is the new front line of a war without guns, a place where money is not only a means of payment, but a strategic weapon determining the power structure of the entire 21st century. Consequences for the West. The currency is no longer undefeated. For nearly a century, the US dollar has been king of currencies, the heartbeat of the global financial system. Every oil deal, every trade contract, every national reserve had to revolve around that piece of paper bearing Washington's face. But, as history inevitably shows, no empire, even a monetary empire, can be immortal. As BRICS builds new payment corridors and real asset exchanges, the dollar, the symbol of American power, begins to lose its monopoly. As countries are no longer forced to use USD to buy energy or settle commodities, demand to hold dollars falls sharply. Less demand means a weaker dollar, and more dangerous still, America loses the privilege of printing unlimited money, the privilege that funded wars, rescued the economy, and even manipulated global financial markets for decades. From a position of printing strength, the U.S. now faces the consequences: inflation, public debt, and lost trust. That shift is sending serious tremors through Wall Street. When foreign investors no longer crave U.S. treasuries, interest rates must rise to keep capital at home. But higher rates mean a bigger debt servicing burden at a time when U.S. public debt has already surpassed $36 trillion, equivalent to more than 120% of GDP. This is an extremely dangerous spiral. Raise rates to defend the dollar, but the higher rates push America closer to the risk of a bond crisis, something never seen in modern history. A nation that once lived on the world's trust is now having to borrow that very trust to survive. But the fallout is not confined to financial ledgers. It spills into the military domain, once America's hard power. In the hypersonic technology race, the U.S. discovers it is short of critically important materials: niobium, cobalt, and rare earths elements largely held by BRICS, especially Brazil, China, and Russia. From fighter jet turbine blades to missile engines to weapons guidance systems, everything needs them. And as BRICS establishes exchanges for strategic metals, pricing and distribution are no longer controlled by the West. A financial empire collapsing triggers the shaking of an industrial defense empire. Analysts in Washington call this a crisis of strategic supply chains, something that could slow America's progress on key military programs. Every plan to develop new weapons is indirectly taxed because the raw materials are no longer under S. Control. And, for the first time in decades, the U.S. must consider buying resources instead of simply printing money to obtain them. Meanwhile, across the global south, a new power map is forming. African, South American, and Middle Eastern countries, once sidelined by the financial system, are becoming centers of a new world. Angola, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Brazil, and Iran are pouring billions into mining, smelting, energy, and agriculture, preparing to become strategic suppliers for BRICS' exchange. For them, this is not only economics, it is political liberation, an escape from the shadow of the dollar. African businesses can now sell gold and lithium in renminbi or rubles. Middle Eastern states can sign oil contracts without passing through American banks. Even South America, Washington's traditional backyard, is switching sides as it finds in BRICS a fairer playing field, where real value is paid with real goods, not with paper debt. These movements are creating a new bipolar era. One side is the West, rich in money but short on resources. The other side is BRICS, abundant in resources and overflowing with ambition. And between these poles, the dollar, once a symbol that made the world kneel, is gradually losing its champion's crown. Posibles escenarios. The world is entering a phase where money is not only a means of payment, but also a strategic weapon. And as BRICS builds a new financial order, the West cannot stand still. Both power blocs are quietly preparing for a war without smoke, where banks replace battlefields and interest rates replace artillery shells. From these signals, three major scenarios are coming into view, each capable of deciding the fate of the world for decades to come. A global financial war. If BRICS continues pushing exchanges for gold and strategic metals, the U.S. will almost certainly respond with economic sanctions, the tool Washington has used successfully for the past 50 years. Bans on trading gold, oil, and minerals from BRICS countries could be imposed, alongside blocking banks, organizations, or individuals participating in the parallel payment system. This would be a modern version of the Cold War, except instead of missiles, both sides use bank accounts and energy supply to choke each other. The West is likely to deploy what could be called petrodollar 2. It will pressure allies in Europe, Japan, South Korea, and Australia to return to trading in USD. Major financial institutions, such as the IMF, the World Bank, or even NATO, could be mobilized to defend dollar standards from being replaced. But BRICS will not stand still either. It will expand its metals alliance, linking with Africa, the Middle East, and South America, regions that hold the resource lifelines of the world. When gold, oil, and rare earths are traded outside the U.S. dollar's domain, the heart of the Western financial system is split in two. The world will witness a global financial partition, similar to how Berlin once divided Europe, except the monetary wall this time will be higher and far more invisible. Scenario 2. Two parallel systems, the era of financial bipolarity. This is the most likely scenario. Instead of direct war, the world will operate with two parallel monetary systems. In the West, the USD remains king across Europe, North America, and Japan, economies tied closely to Wall Street. In the East and the South, a CNY gold system, a model based on the renminbi, gold, and BRICS real assets, also becomes a pillar. As in the Cold War, the two giants do not fire shots, but the camps are clearly divided. One side controls information, the other controls resources. Neutral countries, such as Turkey, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Mexico, will have to walk a careful tightrope, leveraging both systems to survive. And people around the world will gradually notice that the price of gold, the price of oil, even the price of food, will no longer be decided in London or New York instead. It will be Shanghai, Riyadh, or Moscow. This era will open a Cold War financial edition, a battlefield without blood, but with consequences that spread wider than ever: interest rate volatility, capital flow reversals, and exchange rate shocks rippling across the planet, collapsing trust, and reshaping the monetary system. The most extreme scenario, but also the most thought-provoking: a soft collapse of the US dollar. When US public debt crosses the threshold of sustainability. When investors lose confidence in treasuries, capital will flee, interest rates will spike, and the United States itself may have to borrow in someone else's currency. In that crisis, the world will be forced to find a new order where real goods, real money, and real assets replace paper trust. Countries will use gold, oil, gas, or digital assets to back their currencies. China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, the three pillars of BRICS, will become the center of the new financial system, where money is priced by something real rather than by promises. And then, the global economic order will be rebuilt from the ground up. But nations that prepare early stockpiling gold, energy, or data will endure. Those who still believe the dollar is forever may wake up in a world where the once undefeated currency is nothing more than paper no one wants to hold.